Alright, motherfucker's done. Alright. Finally. Everyone stop making fucking noise so I can record. Alright. This is a video on firepower. Because it's awesome. And we need it. So this is my little prepared statement before the presentation. Holy fucking shit. More litter box digging. Would you fucking stop? Go to the bathroom and stop digging. Alright. Small arms will not save us. Large caliber weapons are needed to face the Imperial state and have always been used by resistance forces. There isn't a need for precision weapons, but the capabilities have become cheaper and more accessible to the average person, and so the option needs to be reevaluated by the left. Dumb weapon systems of almost all kinds, except howitzers, are relatively easy to create in small underground factories. The utility of these weapons has still been proven on the battlefield, even for resistance forces. Okay. Oops. Bear with me. Alright. So, start off, we have a favorite of lots of resistance forces, but especially of Vietnamese. They fucking love these things. They're essentially just like replacements for howitzers that are more easily portable, have elements to them that allow them to be used in more versatile situations, with the downside of range being affected. So they have like a couple mile range at max versus a howitzer maxes out with normal rounds of about 15 miles. So this is what they look like. Sorry about that. That might keep popping up. So as you can see, it's very simple. It's just a barrel and a chamber. And then on top here, most of them have these. Most of the big ones, at least, it's a sighting rifle. So it fires like I'm not sure what the caliber, but a pretty large caliber still round to sight it. And then you look for that impact, and then you know if you're on target. And we'll be getting into the ammo, but as you can see, the casings, they're different, and that's the whole point of how it operates, because it's recoilless, so it is directing propellant out the back to counterbalance the recoil, and so it does not need an insane hydraulic system or any sort of recoil absorption to balance the recoil and help keep you accurate, because that is how these guns remain accurate, is by balancing the recoil or just controlling it. Because so like a big part of ballistics is when the guys stopped. I'm sorry, I have many cats. Hey, knock it off. Okay, so what happens is when you ignite the propellant, it burns very quickly, and pretty much most of it burns all at once. For most systems, you get burning that continues throughout the whole thing. But so because most of that happens before the projectile leaves the barrel, you have the recoil that happens before it leaves the barrel. And so this is true with basically all guns. The barrel will lift up before the round exits. And so by counterbalancing that recoil, or being able to absorb it with a hydraulic system, you then can keep the barrel on point as the projectile exits the barrel. And so that is what makes these things so accurate and so light and so useful. So this is an image from, I believe it's World War II, but it might be Vietnam, I forget. That's Vietnam. Look at the rifle. This is a shoulder-mounted recoilless rifle. They're not all single use now, but most of them are single use. And they look a lot more high tech now, but it's pretty basic. It's just a tube. You got the fire control system. You got a breech in the back that you unhook it. They slide the projectile in. You got the sight, and just a shoulder mount system. And that's basically it. And it's just a matter of having the right tolerances on the barrel and having the round be manufactured correctly. It's pretty basic, and they do a lot of damage. So this is what they look like. So as you can see, there's they have these perforations on the casing, which is not typical in an artillery round, at least. Not all artillery actually has casing. When you get to like really large artillery systems, that they have this modularity with the propellant, and they're essentially in these like modular kind of like paper casings, but we'll get into that. I think sometimes plastic. And but so these casings, they have these perforations in it that expel about I think it's like half the gases out the back, and then the rest propel it forward. And so it's also there's something called the high-low pressure system with projectiles, and it's more prominent in like smaller grenade launch systems, like the 40 millimeter grenade, where they have like a little case that has a small amount of propellant in it, and it exists in a larger chamber, and when the propellant is ignited, it's forced out into that larger container, and it's able to effectively use less propellant to get the same muzzle velocities. It's a similar kind of principle here, but except you're instead of all the propellant going out the front of the barrel, like the grenade launcher, you got a bunch going out the back. And so you can see in this diagram here, it goes out and balances. And got a video of one. Oh, oops. I don't know why there's no sound. Deal with it. That's the sighting rifle. And so it loads just like normal artillery, basically. Breech loaded. And so that's one of the things that you always have to take in consideration, is that these cannot be fired as fast as a howitzer, because you have to walk away from the back because of that hot propellant gas that will kill someone standing behind there. And so let me get this full screen again. There we go. Okay. And so let me just back it up to this. So a howitzer can be fired really fast because the soldiers you can have the whole team standing behind it, fire, open breach, fire, open breach. That can't happen with this. So you cannot mass artillery the same. But the trade-off is you can bring them pretty much anywhere that like walking troops can carry them. You know, it might take a couple of guys, or you might have to like use a pulley system, but you can basically get these anywhere, and that's where they really come in handy. So, this is another, or this is a picture of the Vietnamese with one of their systems, and they love to shell the Americans with these. It's pretty much the main way they shelled Americans besides mortars. They didn't really have a lot of howitzers. And so this is this was basically the last tank destroyer that the Americans produced, and it didn't really get used as a tank destroyer that much in Vietnam. Even though the North had a lot of tanks, I mean, I shouldn't say a lot, but they had tanks. They just weren't really being used against the Americans that much, and so these got used to destroy infantry positions a lot because you have 6 of them, and you can just roll it right up. And before they're able to get their anti-armor weapons on it, you're able to fire off just this like salvo almost of 6. Like I think they're 105 millimeter rounds on one target, and so it's insane. And then you just back it up behind cover again and reload them all. And so that's the trade-off here, is you got to reload them outside the vehicle. But you know, this is stuff like this is very easy in essence to build compared to precision missiles. So this is also I believe from Vietnam, but this setup has like been used everywhere. It was used by like in the Indian and Pakistan wars and Iran-Iraq wars, when you want to be able to make a challenge to the armor without risking your own armor, or if you don't have any, you can mount one of these onto a Jeep, and you just basically really quickly roll the Jeep up and fire and try to get away. It's still really dangerous, but you can make a serious challenge to armor, and especially in being on a very lightweight, fast, mobile platform, you can very quickly get to the flanks of the tank or behind the tank and essentially one-shot a tank with these. And so, you know, we're talking a very, very cheap platform that can take out like a few $100 million tank. Main battle tank. So this is a more modern, I think this is the AT-4. There's also it's called the Carl Gustav gun, which is like this older version of this that they also keep upgrading. The drawback on this is, from what I hear, these are horrific to shoot. Like, basically, like most people who like shoot these end up with like kind of problems, because there's so much blast pressure that like it's crazy. Like, people get headaches and dizzy and basically all the signs of TBIs and stuff. And you know, this does not come without its side effects, and that needs to be mitigated. So this is what's called the M law. It's like the M72 law. It's let me double check the size. It's a 66 millimeter. It's classified as an anti-tank projectile, but I think that's only for lighter skin tanks. I don't think this really does much to the Abrams, besides like maybe fucking up tracks or something, which is still useful. Getting a mobility kill or an optical kill on the tank is still like very strategically valuable. So this is a disposable system, like the AT-4. Let me back it up. That AT-4. So you just fire it throw it away. And it basically has a propellant charge, and this is the rocket motor actually, but there's a propellant charge in there, and it blows it out, and the rocket motor takes over, and these fins pop out, and it's a shaped warhead, and it can take out fortified positions. So we're moving on to mortars, and to really talk about the significance, I want to show this chart, which shows the angles of fires that each system has, and it shows why there's relevancy even for resistance forces that have a variation, because it's an essential element to combined arms battle to be able to attack targets at multiple angles. And one of the big reasons for that is just the angles of cover. And so, you know, what we see here is the high angle of fire that the mortar has allows you to get into high angle spaces, whether someone's behind a high angle mountain or in a trench. That's what mortars are good for, arcing into the trench. A howitzer is just gonna boom, they show with the field gun here, just bam. And in a trench, it's just either gonna hit the top mound of the cover or just go right over it and not do anything. And so they still use howitzers to like shell trenches for airbursts and just general suppression. But if you want to like destroy targets in a trench, you use a mortar. And also the lightweight maneuverability of the mortar also allows for speedy artillery fire, and so there's more uses than just the high angle of fire. Also, another thing to talk about is you have to take in consideration like trees and aircraft and other things when you and each other. So you can have rounds hitting each other, so you don't necessarily want like the mortar being in the exact line with the howitzer, because if you're firing both at the same time, they can hit each other in a not good way. This is a 40 millimeter mortar. It's used in Ukraine. It's got a way shorter range, but it's very lightweight. And look how small it is. And there's actually another version of this. Look at too. Here it is. So this is something the Americans have started fielding. Sorry, I don't have a better photo, but as you can see, he's holding it with his hand. And there's a base plate, and so you like kind of pin it to the ground, but there's no other support, and so it's meant to like really be mobile this way. And it has a longer barrel, so it's potentially like more accurate if you can hold it right. And so this is like used very much with the kind of main element that's in contact. These things aren't necessarily being used like behind tree lines or behind other lines far away. They employ these like right up with the main element, assaulting or whatever. So it's a very kind of unique mortar. Let me just double check something. Yeah. So this is the 60 millimeter mortar. This is it's an 8. I think it's an 80. But what it is it's a mortar gun, and so let me backtrack on the mortar a little bit. So what's one second. Okay. So one thing I forgot to mention about the recoilless rifles, and it's relevant to the mortars. So a mortar is a smoothbore gun. Um, Not like exclusively, but basically all of them are smoothbore. A recoilless rifle and like a howitzer field gun is rifled, and so as the projectile moves through the barrel, like any rifle, it spins the projectile and helps it to maintain accuracy. And actually, what it's doing is the spin helps keep a consistent target. It's not actually helping it go straight, which isn't important. Isn't important. You don't necessarily want your projectile going in a perfect trajectory. You just want it to hit the same point each time. Uh, so it's about predictability, and that's what the rifling helps do. But what it actually does is induce a curve to the round, and that depends on the twist rate, how much rifling there is, and how much it twists it upon leaving. And so you have to take that into consideration when sighting these systems. It adds another element on top of the fact that you're farther away and then have to deal with all the weather, and just like Coriolis effects of the earth. And there's all this stuff. Mortars are actually generally easier to target because they're closer. They may be more inaccurate in general, but that direct line of fire that's caused by it being smoothbore, just it creates like more simple calculations when trying to figure out your trajectories, and as a result, it makes it faster, and especially the fact that you don't have to open a breach to reload it. You just and the fact that the breach isn't far away, you just or I mean the muzzle isn't far away, you just drop it in, boom, drop it in, boom, drop it in, and so it makes mortar very fast system. And so that's going to be like a theme throughout all of this is different guns have different speeds and fire effects and ranges, and they all work together to support each other to produce a different combined arms effects. Sorry, they all work together to produce combined arms effects that is essential for really anything in military strategy. So, getting back to the gun mortar, it looks really similar to a field gun, or a howitzer, just like without a muzzle brake, as most howitzers have like the muzzle brake on it now. And so what's unique about this versus a howitzer or field gun is the angle of fire. And so it's a breech loaded system. Usually they actually load them with clips, and there's like an auto system. It's boom, 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 and then they just keep feeding clips in, and it's heavier, so you still have to like tow them or like drag them. But when you get them in position, you can just fire off tons of high angle shots really, really fast, and be able to hit angles that howitzers and field guns can't get. So really cool. And they also, we'll see, they load them on vehicles. I'll show it in a second. This is I don't know why I didn't label these. It's the 80 millimeter. Yes, the 80 millimeter mortar. And so, we're starting to see how at these larger sizes, they really aren't mobile anymore, and they have to start dragging them around on vehicles and stuff. So this is another mortar gun. It's towed, or sorry, this isn't a mortar gun like the other one. Sorry. This isn't a mortar gun like the other one. It's just a towed mortar. This is I believe that's the... I think this is the Soviet 200 millimeter. So this might be the 105 millimeter mortar or something. And yeah, I don't think I included this 80. I think that's the 60. Sorry. So this is a mortar carrier. These have existed in various forms. This is basically just like an armored personnel carrier, the M113 modified, basically. Not don't quote me on that because it's probably like a different chassis or whatever. But there's like a turret there, and it essentially just, there's a top compartment. You open it up, set the mortar up, fire it, close it up, and drive away. And you can operate the whole thing inside and keep the crew basically almost completely safe, besides having to pop up to drop the round in, and then you have your supporting gun. So you can, like, the whole point of this is you can fire mortars off and be taking contact at the same time. It's what makes it really good. And so there's more advanced versions that are completely armored, have thicker armor, can possibly engage direct fire targets depending on the angle of fire. This one goes pretty freaking low. It's not going to have the same muzzle velocity as a tank gun, because the whole point of having such variation in the angle of fire is you're trading off stability with the firing, because they can fire such a overpressured projectile out of a tank if they have the gun supported right, and with like a hydraulic system built into the tank to absorb that, because otherwise freaking like flip the tank, or I don't know if you can flip the tank, but it just like won't be accurate, and you'll just like knock the tank all over the place. So you have to have stability. And so you're firing a lower velocity round, but being able to get a huge variation in the range. And you have your supporting machine gun, and these are little mortar canister actually for smoke rounds. So if they take contact, they pop these off, and it creates this like almost instant smoke screen. And yeah. That might be the 100 millimeter. I forget. So, just wanted to show a couple things here. This is how they load it. We'll show the propellant systems in a second. You got your fuse there. There's a lot of different fuses. They prep rounds beforehand, depending on like what they think they need, and put the fuses on. They come separate because there's a lot of different fuses. You have airburst, you have ones that are just triggered to hit the ground and explode, and the airburst ones have like they turn them to set the time. It's a complicated thing. Well, some are timed and some aren't. That depends. And so one thing that's actually, it's mostly used for engaging the rifling on rifled artillery systems, but it's also on smoothbore just because it's kind of does the same thing. In essence, except it's just not spinning it. You have this ring around the projectile, because if you had the round big enough to create the seal you needed to induce pressure, I'm pretty sure you just likely end up creating a bomb in the tube, but you just create a thing that would get jammed a lot and blow up. So having this ring here creates that seal without the whole round needing to be oversized and be able to create that seal. And so this actually Not sure exactly they work the same on a smooth bore, but on a rifled system, they like expand when they're under the force like a little bit, um, and engage that rifling. And so this is what the propellant rings look like. This is what gives mortars a variability in ranging. So this is the standard charge that gets put into it, into the bottom. It just looks like a shotgun shell, except no no shot in the end, just propellant. Um, and then depending on where they want, like, let me go back. Depending on whether they want to hit like here or here or here or here, you can change the angle of fire, but you can also get this variability by changing the propellant rings that they have there. And what that also does is there's like kind of debate on how much this is used and the efficacy. But being able to time multiple rounds from the same position onto the same target at the same time. So they essentially fire at different angles with different propellant charges. And because they're all different angles and have different like muzzle velocities and stuff, they can time it to all hit at the same spot. So that's a top-down shot of a mortar. As you can see, it's essentially just a tube, a special tube that's that's obviously like laid correctly and heat treated right, but that's essentially like all it is with a good sight and a support system. This is all like engineering that like is done by so many machine shops essentially. You're talking about generally stock tubes that are heat treated in a central place, and like a lot of different kind of heat treatments can be used for mortar tubes. Obviously, you have specialized heat treatments to like get really long lasting barrels and get like obviously extra um, advantages in performance, but like at the basic level, there's basic, you know, heat treated stock out there that you essentially just drill out, lathe, put the support on. And from like a big factory standpoint, like obviously like it's a little bit harder to do this at home, but like from a factory standpoint, this is really basic. So this is one of my favorite systems. This is really old from um the idea comes from World War One and trench warfare. I believe this mount was potentially used on tanks in World War Two, but not positive on that. But this is called a spigot mortar, and then instead of a tube and propellant on the outside of the thing, driving this out, you mount. You have a hollow tail here, and you mount the tail onto a spigot, just this metal rod essentially, and you have the propellant packed inside, and you fire it, and this is like even easier to build. There are trade-offs. The recoil is insane for like how little distance and you get. I don't know if I don't think you measure with muzzle velocity at this point because it's not there's no muzzle. But one of the benefits too is it's virtually silent, and there's no propellant signature because it's all contained within this system, especially with I'll show here. This is a special forces version. The spigot is inside the tube, and so it contains it even more. And they use these and just to get like the 100 meters to the next trench and shell the next trench from their own trench. But what I find interesting about this is like I don't think people comprehend how like stupidly simple this is. This can be a disposable system made out of just like hard wood, maybe with like some reinforcement over the top. But like that's so easy to build, just to basically make a bunch of wood rods with a base plate and a mortar on top, and you have this disposable system that can be like put places and timed, just like the Al Qassam Brigade does, where they just set up these time barrages. But like you could like have so many of these, and you could potentially like you might not even need a base plate. You could potentially just like stick it in the ground with like a stake, all this stuff. Um, and so this is like this is the same thing as that there on the right. And so this is like just a basic like cast iron, steel, whatever, like metal thing. Like the machining and casting involved with something like this is like so basic. It's not some super um treated metal that like has to like withhold like an explosion happening with it inside it and not like turn into a bomb. It's because the pressures are happening the opposite way. The tolerances are way different, and so it's extremely versatile for resistance forces. And like it's kind of it gets forgotten because it wasn't even used in World War II basically, and so um yeah, I don't know. I think the fact that the Soviets never developed this, and so that's a big way it never made its way into resistance forces because the Soviets provided essentially the weaponry to resistance movements like throughout history, and even now it's all their old designs. So I wish I had better photos, but this is a brand new like developed like 2 years ago by the Russians, by the Russian Federation. It's used by their special forces, and it's a silent, it's a spigot mortar, so it's silent, and they have it a little bit more engineered where they have the tube, so it's like think a tiny bit of propellant like leaks out the back potentially, and so that's what this helps to contain, and I think it helps with like kind of directing loading it and stuff so it can make it faster and um also just makes it look more like a traditional mortar, which is probably helpful in its own way. And so what's interesting about this is because of the insane recoil generated by these things, this actually has this whole um it's a little complicated. It's still not too complicated. Nothing CNC machines can't cut out. But it's this spring-loaded piston system. So the propellant, the propellant drives the round off the spigot, and then they have a spring-loaded piston that shoots and hits the spigot and acts as a counter recoil. Um, so that that's pretty helpful for keeping it accurate. Um, and probably with making it last longer. Another diagram of the piston system. So this is a naval use of the spigot mortar from actually World War II for I forget if they were like radar charges or like the depth charges they used to take out tanks. I think they're depth charges. And th- this is like what where the system really excels because there's the drawbacks obviously, especially the range limit it on the traditional battlefield. Like it would be cool to have like a salvo of these mounted on like a vehicle, but when you can only fire it like 100 meters, it might not be the best thing, especially when you can just fire off a salvo of rockets that are like just as easy to design. Um, So, and are like going to be just as accurate too, because that's not accurate. Um, but so, you know, they encounter like a submarine, they have this on the deck, and they just fire all these off. I'm pretty sure just one at a time. Boom, 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 boom. Um, and yeah, it's cool. I love it. So, World War One anti-tank system using the spigot mortar. It's called the Blackbird bomb, and as you can see, like the amount of force needed to be able to propel this system creates so much recoil that I have to have it in this like crazy thing. And I don't think this is really a blast shield as much as just bulletproof protection. Um, but you know, stuff like this still potentially has uses. So why? Oh, I don't know why I have the RPG here right now. I think I just had the RPG because I just want to show that the RPG, it uses the same smoothbore principle essentially as like a kind of like the mortar, and built in with the recoilless rifle principle and a rocket. So it's this interesting combination of systems. Um, so you know, you have this is like a cardboard tube. It's a wax cardboard tube, and inside are the fins. This is the rocket motor. Here would be like this whole thing. Um, and then this is a shaped 100 millimeter warhead, the shaped charge. And this is a 30 millimeter grenade round essentially that's just being fired as a rocket that can go really far. Um, and so this propellant tube blasts it out of this 30 millimeter essentially grenade tube, which is not hard to make. Yeah, RPGs are made clandestinely all the time. Blast out, and the rocket motor engages the fin. The fins shoot out, you know, and boom. And this is the RPG 29. This is the RPG. I think it's the 16. It might be the 7. Essentially, they not gonna go through the whole history, but the like main variants RPG 2, right out of World War II, that was still used a lot throughout the 20th century. And the RPG 7 and 16 are the other standardized variants that were mass produced and used by resistance forces. Essentially, all the same systems, though. RPG 29 is very different, though. It does not rely on a propellant blast, shouldn't call it blast, propellant charge to send the charge out and then ignite a rocket motor. What it does is the rocket motor. This is the whole thing here is the rocket motor, and then this is a 100 millimeter warhead, tandem charge specifically. And so what it does is it burns the whole propellant in the rocket motor before it leaves the barrel, and so there's not exhaust that burns the operator. And what this also does is makes it quieter. It doesn't create a signature in the front like the RPG 2, 7, and 16 do, which could potentially give you away. It just creates a signature in the back, which is easier to hide. Um, another advantage is that the muzzle velocity isn't all concentrated at one point. Is It's distributed throughout the whole tube, so it creates a different tolerance, and so there's different like there's just I don't know enough about the engineering specifically. There's not a lot of information in English on the RPG 29. Anyone that like knows more about it and like can read Russian and stuff and knows a lot about specifically this system and how it's different from the other RPG systems, please comment and tell more. Um, and so what's interesting is that it generates the same muzzle velocity, but distributes that tolerance, or not like exactly the same muzzle, but comparatively same muzzle velocity, and but distributes that muzzle velocity across the whole barrel. It makes it quieter too. Trying to think of other. The charge itself is like probably a lot harder to make, but not a whole ton, a whole lot harder. Like once you have like the machining capabilities to make a rocket motor like this, it's not all that much harder. And the trade-off of like potentially being able to have more launchers. Yeah. Oh, and another thing is when you have when you distribute the tolerances like that, it also makes it more accurate. So that's like a huge benefit to the RPG 29 versus other RPG systems. And the RPG is already very accurate. So that's what makes this very devastating. Because like I'm not sure exactly the effective range, but very far away you can land accurate shots. And I know the Iraqi resistance use this. Not sure other places this popped up. Um, but I believe it was like the Challenger tanks were very susceptible to the system because they could essentially, create standoff engagements with this. So this is one of the disposable RPG systems used mostly with airborne troops. It's really, really small. It's a little stock. Just brace it against your arm, your shoulder. It's just a little tube. I. It doesn't even seem like there's. I don't think this is recoilless. Actually, I think it's just a little mini grenade launcher. Uh, so this was made like right after World War II, and it was essentially replaced by like thermobaric warheads and normal RPG systems. But this was like before that was developed. This is actually like essentially like a napalm kind of mixture. It's like a fuel mixture, so it's less thermobaric and more just blows fuel everywhere. Um, as a replacement to flamethrowers, safer alternative. And so this is just, nowadays I'm pretty sure these tubes don't have to be made of metal, just like carbon fiber lining. I'm not positive on that. I'm pretty sure a lot of them do though now. But this is just a metal tube. I believe that's a sighting rifle on top. And the propellant casing is just this metal casing, like looks like a sprinkler head as the exhaust port, and the propellant driving out of this casing is half of it drives the projectile, the barrel, and the other half then it gets vented out behind. Very very basic design, very basic machines parts. Oh right, so This is one of my favorites. This little thing right here. It's Chinese MLRS system. It's not precision. This one is precision over here. Not like there's levels of variability with the precision in these systems, but this like essentially blankets like around like a square kilometer of an area pretty accurately. The salvo, um, this one it's like way larger of a range, but you're able to just roll these up and fire off a salvo and roll them away. You don't have to sit there and do a whole barrage and be susceptible to counter battery fire. You do have the signature created by the rocket, but the trade off is you fire it and you just leave really quickly, and you're able to get really huge area suppression effects with MLRS systems. And so, okay, so this is the round that is fired out of this. There's, that this is the Chinese version. These are like Iranian made copies, essentially. It just looks like a normal howitzer round. The advantage is these can be machined. They don't have to be forged like all rockets. That's the huge advantage. It was a huge advantage for rockets over howitzer systems, like even for the Soviet Union with all their industrial might during World War II, like especially because it was being challenged, and so when they had to like keep their factories mobile and keep pushing them back behind the line, it was a huge advantage to be able to not have massive forges required to be able to manufacture 100 to 200 millimeter howitzer rounds. You just have small machine shops and be able to create a round that's bigger than the howitzer, that can go farther than the howitzer and be fired in these giant salvos. And yes, it's not as accurate, but if you're dealing with like a large front and a huge invasion, you don't need that. You just need to be able to fire these off really quickly, be able to have a ton of them. And so the these get used in resistance, fighting a lot. The Al Qassam Brigade and other factions of the Palestinian resistance use these. This is a little fancy of a mount. It's not fancy at all, but for what the Palestinians deal with, it's pretty fancy. They don't have a lot of metal right now, and so they actually take these and they prop them up on like bags of dirt, or like windowsills, or just mounds that are already there, and they just put a bunch of these out over the place on with time ignitions, and they set them up and time them for all at once, and they can barrage Israeli positions without having to risk getting destroyed by counter battery fire. And it's so effective. They use them all the time, and they inflict so many casualties on the Israelis without like ever getting their own casualties, because they're able to shell them without and just go back into their tunnels. It's awesome. This is another image of. This is the same rocket here, and what? So, this is the warhead, and this is the rocket motor. And so there's essentially, I think it's 6 of them, of these like tubes with propellant, like solid rocket motor propellant in a case that goes across this. And this is a machine, like this whole thing is machined, and this is the nozzle, and they just like essentially screw it on. Um, I think they screw it on. They might actually like weld it. So this is the back side, and so what's interesting about it is it produces a spin without going through a rifled barrel, and it's able to be fairly accurate for the what it is because of this. Um, it might be hard to tell, but essentially all these nozzle holes are drilled at an angle, and so it produces a spin as the propellant is fired. Another angle of so this is all really basic machining equipment. They produce these in underground facilities. It's pretty cool. So this is it's like the Qassam 2. It's what their larger artillery rocket. This is one of their smaller ones. It's a bad photo. It would look better smaller. But yeah, I mean, like, these things aren't like the resistance in Palestine has just nothing basically but scrap, and they're able to make these with that. I mean, so scrap and fertilizer and sugar. So it's pretty cool, and people act like they're just shooting these at random, but there is 100% a tactical and strategic point to using these, and so yeah. This is those. I think. Yeah, it's a different one. That's a bigger one. I just want to show this again because we went through a lot of the systems. You get the same angle of trajectory as with the rocket and the howitzer, and so you're able to create these area effects of suppression. Okay, so we are on to the howitzers. This is an older howitzer. They didn't have muzzle brakes on them, and then they started doing that, and they got way more accurate. A lot of other stuff, but this is the modern one used by the military, U.S. military. So this is the propellant charges used in them. So sometimes they are in actual like metal casings, and they, depending on the size and the system, they pack them themselves so they can have control over them in the field. And so they'll weigh the like trade-off sometimes if they want all the rounds standardized and in a certain way, they'll pack them in their cases, and they'll just have all of them with the same number of charges. But having these essentially propellant bags allows the same modularity as you get with the mortars with those propellant rings, and they just, depending on whether what they want to like just max out the amount of pressure they can get out of the howitzer or only have a little bit, they stack these charges up after they shove the round in. And so there's a lot of different ways they do it, and they all have different effects. I think these are plastic cases, or it's just super packed propellant. And then they obviously put them in bags, and they have paper casing too that they use. Um, but the other side, these like so this is a lot easier. These propellant cases are a lot easier to make than a rocket motor. But this is the drawback is that having the propellant go through the system like this, you have to whatever. Okay. Okay. So I'm back. I got interrupted. So the um the drawback is that having the propellant go through like this is requires a bunch of really solid engineering in the systems to deal with those pressures, and as a result, you need to forge the equipment, the rounds itself, and barrels, and a lot of the parts that are used with the gun. Versus a rocket where it can be machined almost entirely. I think basically most rockets are entirely machined. Besides like using heat treated stock, but using heat treated stock is way different than the processes needed to especially forge howitzer rounds. There's one howitzer factory in the U.S. I'm not sure if the other one's up and running, but the bottleneck of Ukraine and Israel shelling everyone has like depleted U.S. stockpiles and put a bottleneck on the one howitzer round factory in the so yeah. So this is one of the plastic cases. So this is an idea I had. The efficacy of the idea is obviously really up in the air. As far as I know, it hasn't been tested. I obviously have no ability to test this right now. And I don't have that much engineering knowledge, so I can't even theoretically properly evaluate this idea. But what I was thinking about is what if there's a combination of essentially a rocket and a howitzer, but in a way we haven't seen before because they've combined them before. There's rocket assisted howitzer rounds. They have actually like loitering drones inside, basically built into howitzer rounds now. But what they don't have is essentially a howitzer or howitzer type gun that uses the principle of the RPG 29, where instead of the propellant all being ignited at once, creating the need for a very, very well forged like breach and whatever. I'm not sure all the terms, but what if that same large, let's say 155 millimeter howitzer round had a rocket motor, and so as a result, potentially the round itself could be made out of machined material. It can possibly be made out of polymer. The if as long as the machining for the engine and the engine has a simple design, that should be relatively easy to make, and it gets rid of the need for gigantic forges to make the rounds. And then all of a sudden the gun itself, while still probably needing the same type of recoil, is all of a sudden there's just way less metal and way less like heat treatment and everything you need to make the metal able to uh, tolerate a bunch of explosions happening inside of it. Um, it's potentially all of that is like mitigated by a rocket engine just uh, burning just the distance of the barrel and potentially, maybe just being really large or I mean really long kind of thing. So there's obviously going to be trade backs to that, probably in accuracy and range. Um, well, actually, it should be more accurate because of the principle we talked about earlier of um, if the muzzle velocity and pressure is all distributed. Sorry, not the muzzle velocity, but the pressure is all distributed evenly. It should actually make it more accurate, but you're probably going to trade off range. And maybe some other stuff that I'm not thinking about right this second. But in return, you can have more systems to fire. You can have more rounds. Those factories can be easier to transport if needed, more modular, and this can potentially be synthesized with other weapon systems, especially ground vehicles. I mean, we already see essentially like these type of anti-tank rocket rounds fired from the barrels of a lot of modern tanks, which is why they're typically smoothbore now, on top of high velocity rounds. But that rocket actually burns outside the tube, so it's still not exactly what I'm talking about. But I'd be really interested to hear if there's any engineers and people who obviously know more about this stuff, what they think about something like that, because I think it would, like, outside of just resistance forces, I mean, there's like, that's something interesting for nations out there battling U.S. Imperialism for them to think about, because they could potentially have a lot more weapons to be able to challenge the U.S. with. So, yep, that's all I got. Whatever, like and subscribe. Go fuck yourself. If you don't think we should do this stuff, then you should probably just fuck off and not watch what I make, because it's important. And you should probably not fight anyone if you don't think this is important, because you'll die. So, yeah.